Sendoff by Shaun J. Nigro. Narrated by Todd Waits. "Oh, that's kind of neat," Reardon Sear beamed. He had, for the 5th time, swiped his index finger across the glass screen next to his seat. Talk show host David Blake, one of only a handful of celebrities Reardon could stand in his old age, faded into oblivion with his guest, and the glass became transparent, revealing the runway outside. "I told you, Dad, it's state-of-the-art. Luxury space retirement. That's a capital L." "Jesus, Tom, I'm already here. You don't have to pitch it to me anymore," Reardon grumbled, swapping the glass to bring back the screen. I know, Tom nodded, checking his watch. "What? Too busy to sit with your father for 5 more minutes before his one and only send-off?" Tom glared. "It's not a send-off, Dad. It's retirement. I'll probably die on the way there." A young woman in her 20s, sporting a chic blonde hairdo Reardon didn't pretend to understand, and a red jumpsuit, stopped at their seat and leaned in with a smile. "Just wanted to let you know that we will be preparing for launch soon." "Oh, hello, Tom." She stood straight, seeming flustered. Is this your father?" Tom looked up, returning the smile. "Hello, Maggie. Yes, this is my old man. Shocking, isn't it?" Reardon guessed that his son had some sort of history with the girl. He wasn't surprised to find that he might have been the brunt of a few laughs. He hadn't exactly made it easy for his children over the past few years, adamant that retirement was for quitters, and determined to work until his dying breath. "Well, Mr. Sear," the girl leaned back in, ready to deliver that familiar, patronizing puppy tone Reardon had come to expect in his old age. "Congratulations on your retirement." He rolled his eyes. "Here at Luxury Space Retirement, we guarantee you an unforgettable experience and perfectly safe flight to our Mars location." "Why wouldn't it be safe? I'm not worried about that." "Of course not, Mr. Sear." She stood straight again and turned to Tom. "I'll see you around." She winked and continued up the aisle. Reardon did his best to ignore whatever she might have been insinuating. Wouldn't do any good to start the flight thinking about how many grandkids he'd have the next time he saw his son. "How long does it take to get there again?" "It'll be over before you know it, Dad." Tom looked distracted again, glancing once more at his watch and fidgeting in his seat. "Tom, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you are your father's son. With your work ethic, you'll be just as stubborn as me when you get to—" "Attention passengers. Welcome to the Luxury Space Retirement Mars vessel." The sound came from the speakers installed in all the seats, but it was directed from a large screen on the top half of a wall at the end of the aisle. On the screen, a featureless face smiled, waiting for everyone in the lobby to stop talking. "I will be your guide on this journey," it continued. "As you may know, I am an artificially intelligent seed unit, but for the sake of humility, you may address me as Sam. Your personalized voice, gender preference may be selected via the window screen." Reardon rolled his eyes at Tom. "I gotta listen to that thing the whole trip?" "I would like to congratulate all of you on your retirement and a life well lived." A couple people ahead of Reardon clapped. "Now, as we begin preparation for our launch, I will kindly ask all visitors to wish your loved ones goodbye and exit the cabin." "Right on time." Tom looked up from his watch. "Hey, Dad, you're gonna be fine. Sue and I will visit you next month, like we promised." Reardon was still upset that his daughter couldn't be there to say goodbye, but he knew Tom was right. They'd all be reunited on Mars soon enough. "I do still need you to sign this form before I go, though." "More forms? I thought I already signed my life away," Reardon joked. The last few weeks had seemed like an endless barrage of paperwork. "Signatures out the wazoo," he had said at one point. "What's this one for?" Tom pulled a folded document out of the inside of his coat pocket and pressed a button on the armrest to activate a tabletop to put it on. He placed a red pen marked with a luxury space retirement logo on top of the document. It's just a final consent form for the trip. Technical stuff, but you know how it goes. Reardon grumbled. He pulled the carry-on bag he had brought with him up from between his legs and started digging for his spectacles. Be sure to grab a complimentary refreshment as you exit the cabin, visitors, and thank you for supporting and trusting luxury space retirement with your loved ones. Sam's voice beamed. Dad, just sign the paper. You don't need your soul anyway. Tom winked. Reardon looked his son in the eyes. He suddenly felt like crying as the reality of the situation came crashing down on him. But he had never shown such emotion to his kids before, and he wasn't about to start. He compromised. I love you, son, and I love Sue. You're good kids. I appreciate everything you've done for me. Oh, Dad, don't get all soppy on me. Tom only smiled. He had, apparently, learned too well from his father. Maggie came back up the aisle. Sorry, Tom. Visitors gotta go. Headed out now. Tom handed Reardon the pen. All right, where do I sign? Just here, Dad. And one more time here? He scribbled his signature, barely able to read the words on the paper. Tom took the pen and paper back and put it into his pocket. Gotta go, Pops. There was a moment of silence as they both nodded awkwardly. Don't forget, Tom said. There's no crying in baseball. Tom followed Maggie to the back of the lobby, where she led him outside and across the catwalk they had come in on. Reardon swiped the screen away and could just make out the catwalk toward the back of the ship. His son hurried across the platform with the other visitors and disappeared on the other side into a steel-beamed building with the elevator they had come up on. He made a small waving gesture. Secretly, he had hoped his son would make an attempt to wave back, but he wasn't surprised when he didn't. Always thinking about work, always on the go, just like his father. Reardon leaned back in his seat and took a deep breath. This was it, the moment he had dreaded, probably since the day he was born. What the hell was he going to do now? Play golf on Mars in fluctuating gravity? He chuckled. That actually sounded interesting. The lights illuminating the aisle floor dimmed and a soft beep sounded. Welcome, guests, and soon-to-be residents of the Mars Luxury Retirement Homes. The time has now come. Your loved ones have left the vessel, and you are now legally under the jurisdiction of LRH, Sam said softly. Reardon looked around at his fellow passengers, wondering if anyone else had found the legal jargon strangely forward. We ask now that everyone remain seated with safety straps in place. You'll notice your window shades closing. Reardon watched a panel slowly cover his window screen. Ahead, he could see the rest of the windows being covered in sync. This is just a precaution. You will be allowed to look out of the vessel once we have left Earth's orbit, and, rest assured, you will be protected from the sun's ultraviolet rays, thanks in part to our state-of-the-art tinted glass, which, as you may have noticed, doubles as a video screen with 8K resolution. Reardon chuckled, wondering if any of the other passengers could even see without their spectacles. I will be temporarily offline as the vessel makes its ascent out of the atmosphere, which you will only slightly feel the effects of, due to the state-of-the-art design of the ship's passenger cabin. You may, however, note a temporary weightlessness upon exiting orbit. This, as you may know, is the effect of an absence of gravity, or zero gravity. This weightlessness will be promptly corrected as the ship's artificial gravity takes effect. When I have detected all of your straps secured, we will depart. For your entertainment, an artificially generated rendition of Frédéric Chopin's Nocturne No. 2 in E-flat major will commence. Sam paused as the remaining passengers fastened their straps. A soft beep sounded again. Commence liftoff. Sam's featureless face came to a rest, and the screen went dark as the cabin began to shake so softly that it was almost imperceptible. Reardon looked around the cabin, feeling his heart rate pick up a little. He had never been in space before, but many others before him had. Flying to the moon, Mars, and even Europa was a standard business trip for thousands of passengers every year. It was as normal as an occasional trip to Disney World, which Reardon still kicked himself for ever having done. Goddamn lines and overpriced nonsense were two things he had said at least 100 times on that trip. It was something only Danielle could have ever made him do. He found himself mesmerized by the top of a bald head over the seat in front of him, where a couple lone white hairs were rustling ever so slightly with the soft shaking of the ship. He missed Danielle more than he would likely ever admit. She was, for lack of a better term, the love of his life. And she had been good to him and the children. They were, in fact, supposed to retire together in a seaside cottage out in Portree. Such a retirement was frowned down upon, of course, what with the overpopulation and land scarcity on Earth, but he and Danielle had always been helpless romantics. They had longed for a quiet life outside the pollution and chaotic bustle of the city, but Reardon was never particularly sold on the promise of Mars, as the papers called it. Why the hell would I want to live in a desert? He used to argue. Tom would always retort, "Because, Dad, it's quiet and it's out of the way." Out of the way. The solution to overpopulation for the young folks was getting the old-timers off the planet. Figures. Reardon realized that he had spoken out loud. He looked across the aisle to find a little old lady with a yellow polka-dotted dress and a sun hat staring at him. "Hi," he waved, letting his hand float awkwardly with what must have been that lack of gravity Sam had mentioned. Were they already in space? As if it had read his mind, the aisle lights brightened and Sam's face reappeared with a smile on the screen ahead. "Now, that wasn't so bad, was it?" She paused. He forced his hand down quickly, realizing it was still floating stupidly in front of him. The little old lady had lost interest and was staring ahead at the screen. The panels covering the windows all began to slide up at once. "You may now use your screens. For your safety, please remain seated and strapped until you hear the beep or see the thumbs up on my screen. We wouldn't want you to break any bones floating around in zero gravity," Sam laughed. Was that funny? Reardon wondered, thinking this particular seed unit was enjoying its job a little too much. Outside the window, he could see what might have, at one time, been a marvelous sight to behold. In his day, however, it was a familiar scene, too often recycled for adverts selling products ranging from fizzy pop to luxury homes. Earth, in all its green and blue ballish splendor, seemed to fall away from the window, resembling a marble being thrown to the void. He wondered how fast they were going and, vaguely, if they would see the moon. Bored, he let his hand float to the window, preparing to swipe back to David Blake, but he stopped himself when the scene appeared to flicker. What the hell? He looked around, seeing that everyone else was looking out their windows as well. He wondered what the hell the passengers on the other side of the aisle found so amusing. When it appeared that no one else had seen anything out of the ordinary, he decided he must have collected dust on the drive to the launch port and took his spectacles off to clean. Before he was aware of what he was doing, he let a glob of spit fly from his mouth, intending it to hit one of the lenses, but he was shocked to find the water, instead, floating slowly in front of his face. Zero gravity! He tried to slap his face in a compulsive gesture of duh, but weightlessness slowed his arm's movement significantly, so that it looked more like he was caressing his face softly. He looked back across the aisle to find the little old lady staring at him again, shaking her head in disappointment. When he looked back in front of him, he saw that the globule of spit had advanced significantly and was now hovering just over the bald head of the passenger in front of him. The soft beep sounded then, and a thumbs-up emoji appeared on Sam's screen. Almost instantly, normal gravity ensued, and Reardon's arms fell back down to his lap. The spit glob came splattering down onto the man's bald spot, and Reardon held his breath, anticipating the worst. But, to his surprise, the man did not move. He waited and realized that he could hear a soft snoring. The man had been asleep the whole time. Reardon sighed. He looked back to the old lady and put a finger up in front of his mouth. Shh. You are now free to roam about the cabin. Should you find yourself in need of answering nature's call, there is a restroom at the rear of the cabin. There is also an observatory just past my screen here where you will find water and food dispensing units. 2 arrow emojis appeared pointing at 2 doors on either side of Sam's screen. Reardon had been wondering where those led. Estimated journey time is 1 hour. I will return when we are ready to descend into the Martian atmosphere. 1 hour? Having been a carpenter most of his life, astronomy was not something Reardon could pretend to know. However, 1 hour seemed ridiculously brief for a flight to Mars. He wondered if there had been some breakthrough in spaceflight technologies his algorithms had neglected to alert him to. Admittedly, it would not have been something he would have cared to see at all. The smart stuff had always been relegated to his son. Tom was the brains of the family, without a doubt, to the extent that he had been in charge of Reardon and Danielle's savings and had helped Reardon with finance decisions since Danielle's passing 3 years before. You'll save big time if you go to Mars, Dad, Tom had said not long after Danielle's death. It had come time to reassess retirement plans, and Reardon was no longer looking forward to spending his dying days alone in a seaside cottage meant for 2. A melancholy feeling came over him as he remembered their plans for the cottage. We'll go downtown every morning to greet the locals. We'll get French bread and olive oil and cook pasta with fresh scallops and mussels. I can paint by the window every day, and you can help the neighbors on 1 project at a time, she would always say. She wasn't too keen on him working the rest of his life, but she knew he would always need something to be doing, and so settled on the prospect of smaller projects. She reasoned it would get them in good with the locals. You really don't think we've ever been to the moon? A familiar voice brought Reardon back to the present. I don't think we've ever been to space, David, a man said, followed by the sound of an audience laughing. Reardon looked to find that his window had been changed to a screen again. Had he swiped it without realizing? Right, David Blake said sarcastically. There's no such thing as satellites, there's no colony on the moon, and the elderly are still retiring to Florida. The talk show host rolled his eyes toward the audience, whose laughter transformed into applause. You tell him, Blake, Reardon said to the screen. It wasn't uncommon for David Blake to bring on ridiculous conspiracy theorists simply to roast them. Excuse me, young man. A shaky but pleasant voice came from the aisle. Reardon turned to find a dark-haired woman leaning on a walker stopped at his seat. I haven't seen any of the human attendants since we took off, so I thought I'd try my luck going to the observatory myself. I think I overestimated my strength, though. Could you? Of course, ma'am. Reardon swiped his screen back to window mode and stood up to assist the woman. Thank you, she smiled. Reardon blushed. The woman was as old as him, but she had 2 of the most vibrant blue eyes he had seen since Danielle's, and the charm in her smile nearly put a lump in his throat, as he was reminded of the way Danielle used to look at him. In fact, He felt a strange sense of comfort in the woman's presence that made him forget for a moment that they were on a spaceship en route to a desert planet. "I'm Reardon, by the way." "What's that, dear? I'm a little hard of hearing." "I said, I'm Reardon." He spoke louder. "Oh, I'm Dorothy." She smiled again. He helped Dorothy up the aisle, wondering if the little old polka dot lady was still scowling at his back. They went through the left door by the screen, which slid open as they approached it. On the other side of the door, Reardon's eyes widened. The entire ceiling was transparent, revealing a literal map of the universe. Familiar constellations were alight. Holy crap! "What's that?" He remembered he wasn't alone. "I said, look at that." He spoke louder again, this time pointing over Dorothy to what he thought must be Orion's belt. "Ooh." They moved into the center of the room. In the corner, by the door, there were vending machines, as Sam had said there would be. "Are you hungry?" Reardon asked. "No, I ate with my granddaughter before I boarded the ship. I was told by my doctor that I should wait till we arrive on Mars to eat again." "Well, I'm starving." Tom had picked him up from his apartment and driven directly to the launch port. "Look at that! Star bars!" Reardon rolled his eyes when Dorothy was looking away. He had anticipated a gimmick or two on the voyage, but he decided now that he would try his best to keep the pessimism to himself while he was with this woman. He knew nothing about her, but her presence was making him feel a lot better than he had 10 minutes ago. He went to the machine, relieved to find that there was no charge. The retirement plan was, as Tom had said, a significant savings compared to the seaside cottage, but a company had to at least include meal plans in its maiden voyage itinerary. Then again, it was, somehow, only an hour's trip. "Hey, Dorothy, does it seem strange to you that Mars only takes an hour to get to from Earth?" "Oh, what's that? Oh, well, I guess I haven't thought about it. But yes, a little. But what do I know about astronomy? I couldn't even keep up with all the technology they came out with when I was a girl." He smiled at this, thinking she must have been very beautiful in her young age. Danielle had been breathtaking, even on her deathbed, or in the hospice. She hadn't actually died in front of him. Tom was supposed to pick him up that day to visit, and she had passed later that morning. The body, of course, had been cremated almost immediately by law. There was no longer any room for full corpse burial on Earth due to the overpopulation forcing governments to subsidize lots that used to be cemeteries. He stood in silence with Dorothy, taking small bites of the Star Bar, which, he had to admit, was pretty good. Out of this world, he thought. "Do you have any regrets?" Dorothy asked, eyes still fixated on the universe above. Reardon was surprised at the question. He hadn't expected this sweet old lady to bring up mortality. No," he lied, swallowing the last bite of his Star Bar. "You must be very lucky." Her voice sounded sad now. "Just content, I guess. What about you?" "I do." She went silent for a moment. "I regret not being able to leave more behind for my children." "I regret having children at all," he chuckled. "Oh, stop that." She hit him lightly, glancing at him with a smirk before looking back up. "No, I guess I see what you mean. Hard to leave anything behind in a world where there's no room to breathe." "Yeah. I mean, in terms of inheritance. I know they say luxury, But you and I both know we didn't have much choice coming out here. Reardon couldn't honestly say that he'd felt that way. He had saved a lot of money alongside Danielle's modest sales from her artwork, which, as far as he knew, was still quite popular in some areas. If Danielle were still alive, he would likely be helping some young couple remodel a kitchen down in Portree. I've got a little bit of savings for my kids when I... Dorothy looked at him again. Die? He looked away, hoping she would change the subject. He tried to find Orion's belt again, but where is Orion's belt? Somewhere in the space of time between when he had gotten his star bar and they started talking about regrets, Orion's belt had apparently shifted positions in the panorama. He looked around, thinking the ship must have reoriented. But as he looked around the panorama, he realized something else. Dorothy, are there stars missing here? I told you, I'm no astronomer, and my eyesight isn't what... No, there's something off about this, Reardon interrupted her, pacing around the room. As he paced, his gaze fell on the spot where Orion's belt had been. There it is now. She followed his finger as he pointed to Orion's belt. Oh my, look at that. And then it disappeared again, or flickered. You're seeing that, right? I didn't need a funky star bar? No, she squinted. My eyesight isn't that bad. That is very strange. Maybe there's a scratch on the glass? They looked at each other, knowing this was likely not the case. Maybe one of the attendants could explain it. If you can find one, let me know, she said. Reardon remembered that she had needed his help because she hadn't seen an attendant, and he realized that he hadn't seen one himself. At least not since the girl... What was her name? Maggie. Not since Maggie had greeted him with Tom. But that was before they launched. What about Sam? Who? The face. Oh, yes, the seed unit. He was very nice. Reardon guessed that she had chosen the male voice gender. Well, I'm going to ask him. He tried to think of how he might phrase such an inquiry. I'll ask, what's wrong with the stars? Are you okay here for a moment? Yes, of course, she smiled. He went back through the door and turned to face the screen. But he turned back again to face the other passengers when he realized that they were all asleep. Everyone is sleeping? I know we're old, but... Hello, Mr. Sear. May I help you with something? Yes. He turned back to face a large smiling emoji. He stepped back a little. I was just wondering, Yes, Mr. Sear. Do stars, flicker? Yes, Mr. Sear. In fact, did you know you can tell a star from a planet in the night sky by its twinkle? Stars twinkle. Planets, of course, do not. I see. He was sure he'd heard that somewhere and realized now how obvious that should have been, but then he remembered the flicker in his window screen. Do you have any more questions, Mr. Sear? Wouldn't you like to take a nap? It'll help the time go by faster. Most passengers en route to... No, thank you. I do have another question. What does it mean when a planet flickers? Sam's face disappeared, and she went silent. Sam? Yes, Mr. Sear, I am here. I do not know the answer to that question. Planets do not flicker. Are you sure you're not just tired? Perhaps you would be more comfortable if you took a nap. He turned back to the sleeping passengers and felt himself growing anxious, something quite uncommon for him. Sam, can I make a phone call from my seat? It is not common, but by law. Phone calls are allowed, Mr. Sear. A phone call will cost $45 for 5 minutes. Would you like me to phone your family? Yes, Sam. I think I would like to call my son, Thomas Sear. You may do so with your window screen. I have pulled up a confirmation to withdraw $45 from your bank account. He made his way quickly up the aisle. A blue screen covered his window with a message in black font. Confirm paid amount, $45 for phone call. He tapped yes and waited. A red box with white font appeared. Insufficient funds. What? Sam, can you try that again? Of course, Mr. Sear. The message on the blue screen appeared once more, and he pushed his index finger, this time harder, on the yes button. Insufficient funds. How is that possible? It appears you have insufficient— Yes, I know. Thank you, Sam. Of course, Mr. Sear. Are you sure you don't want to rest a little? We still have 40 minutes left on our journey. No, Sam. I'm not tired. Thank you. He was irritated now. He tried to gather his thoughts when he found himself staring at the bald man's head again. As he sat there staring, he realized he could not hear the man snoring anymore. He kicked the seat lightly. No movement. He started to slide out of his seat when he noticed the lady with the polka-dot dress, fast asleep across the aisle. He didn't think anything else of it until he noticed her arm. It appeared to be dangling over the armrest into the middle of the aisle. The things I do for people. He stood into the aisle and lightly grabbed her arm to bring it back over the armrest. He froze. The arm was cold. Ma'am. The woman did not move. He let the arm drop back over the armrest, expecting it to wake her up, but it just dangled, lifeless. He started to back up down the aisle. He looked on in horror as he realized that all of the faces had gone pale and some of the people had limbs dangling like the polka-dot lady. He grabbed the shoulders of a large man with a white mustache and shook him hard. The man's glasses fell off his face, and he slouched forward in his seat, knocking Reardon over with his weight. He started to get up again when he realized he was sitting on one of Sam's floor speakers. There was a slight draft coming through the speaker. Reardon realized then that these were not speakers at all. They were vents, but the air coming through it was neither cold nor hot. He sniffed, but smelled nothing. Reardon stood up and rushed back to the front of the aisle, past Sam, which was smiling and, though she did not have eyes, he couldn't help but feel like he was being watched. The door to the observatory slid open, and he rushed in but stopped in terror, finding Dorothy sprawled across the floor. Her walker was still standing upright. Dorothy! He kneeled down to her and turned her over. She was lifeless. He checked her pulse. Nothing. He stood up, starting to feel woozy. He realized then that the room had gotten darker. Above, more constellations were flickering out of view, as if the universe were being extinguished. He grabbed the walker and threw it toward the lowest part of the observatory, surprising himself as that section of the universe exploded into a burst of sparks. It's just a screen. He approached the shattered part of the ceiling, the sparks dying down. He recognized the effect as Tom had once forced his controller into the living room TV set while playing a virtual reality game when he was little. This wasn't the universe sprawled out before him. This was a giant screen, a mere planetarium. He caught himself as the room started to spin a little more. Something was making him dizzy, and despite what he had said to Sam, he felt like he wouldn't mind a nap. A long nap. He made his way back to his seat, trying to avoid looking at the faces of the other passengers, who he knew now were dead. But he could see that all of the window panels in the cabin had been lowered again, including his own. As he approached his seat, The exhaustion seemed to kick into overdrive, and he caught a headrest before he could fall too hard onto the floor. But his strength had escaped him by that point, and he found he could no longer hold himself up. He fell to the floor, his face on top of one of the vents. He felt the air, whatever it was, wafting up onto his face, and his mind began to wander with thoughts of Danielle. Thank you for choosing luxury space retirement. We congratulate you on a life well lived, and we sincerely hope that you have enjoyed your flight. Reardon managed to turn himself towards Sam's screen, but only in time to find her smile fading away, in sync with the aisle lights. He was surrounded by darkness for a second, and then all at once, the window panels slid up, inviting beams of bright sunlight into the cabin. There was a metallic sound at the back of the aisle, and he turned back to find people in red hazmat suits entering the cabin. "We've got a live one of them yelled to the others as they approached Reardon. "Oh, Mr. Sear, Tom was right about you. You are a stubborn old fella." He recognized the face through the plastic covering. Maggie stood over him with a cheery smile. "What is—" She held a hand out to silence him. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sear, but you are up way past your bedtime." "What's up with him?" One of the others came up behind her. "The carbon monoxide just hasn't taken effect yet, but I think he's about to—" Reardon closed his eyes. He was about ready for that long nap now, and he felt about as comfortable as one could laying on the aisle floor. When he opened his eyes again, he thought he could see the ocean. In fact, he thought he could smell it. "Danielle?" He sat up and rubbed his eyes. Danielle was standing by a large window overlooking a beach. She was using acrylics to paint what looked like a large red planet. "I've been waiting for you, dear." She turned to him, smiling. He thought that he had never seen such vibrant blue eyes. "Will you go into town to pick up some scallops? I think I'd like to cook us some pasta tonight." Reardon smiled, knowing now that he was content. "Of course I will."